Hello and welcome to Surveyor Says, the podcast from the National Society of Professional Surveyors. Each week, we bring you fascinating guests that are involved in the profession of surveying. We cover a lot of ground, including Table Lay Talk with Gary Kent, Point of Order with the NSPS Joint Government Affairs Team, Future Focus, highlighting current and future leaders of the profession, and everything survey-related in between. Thanks for joining us here on the podcast, and hope you enjoyed listening to this episode of Surveyor Says. Hello and welcome to Surveyor Says, the NSPS Podcast. I'm your host, Tim Birch. This is episode 187. It starts a new series discussing the update to the National Spatial Reference System, the NSRS, through our friends at NGS, the National Geodetic Survey. The new datums, which are going to be replacing NAD83 and NAVD88, are set to take place about a year from now. So we're on a countdown to get ready to modernize and update how we go about collecting our data throughout the United States and actually throughout the world. So my conversation today is with David Doyle, retired Chief Geodetic Surveyor for NGS, and really how the modernization came about. So sit back, relax. Conversations with Dave are always enjoyable, and we'll see what's next on Surveyor Says, the NSPS Podcast. Going back through and thinking about some of the points you made yesterday, I think it really made it more clear that not just telling people, "Hey, we got to get ready for this." Got to give them a reason why.
Absolutely. The general presentation that I've been giving for years now, 10 years. I've called it the rationale for the new reference frames. And a big issue I made with NGS before I retired, I said, obviously, it's a good idea. When Dave Zolkowski reached out to all of the senior staff in 2007 and said, okay, look, let's put our combined technical heads together and see what the future looks like. Out of those discussions came the genesis of, okay, we need to replace NAD83 and NAVD88 for a variety of reasons, and those are pretty well documented. And in looking at that, as I go out and I'm talking about it, there's great science behind it. And I know at a lot of folks at NGS, because the agency is pretty scientifically oriented, at least right now.
Yeah,
that's the heart of the process. Oh, it's about the science. You can't discount that. The science is vitally important. But in a practical sense, because the NSRS has two sides to it, in my little humble opinion, it has the science, and then it has, okay, the products and services that go and support this huge range of practical applications in mapping and charting and surveying and things, some things we couldn't even think of back in 2007.
Right.
And then looking at the impact, okay, if I think back to the days when we were engaged in designing NAD83, going back to the late 70s and early 80s, quite a number of us, myself included, were involved in seminars, workshops at places like the old ACSM conferences, talking about, oh, hey, we're going to do this new datum, NAD83, and this is what it's going to look like, yada, yada, yada. The reality was that with the exception of a few federal agencies, such as the U.S. Geological Survey, Corps of Engineers, a few others, Bonneville Power and Light, TVA, and a few state organizations, California, Minnesota, North Carolina. The overwhelming majority of surveyors never tied in, or rarely tied in, to the reference frame horizontally. And when they did small projects locally and would run little loop traverses. That was the general thing. So, okay, we're going to get these new coordinates. Yeah, big deal. There just weren't a lot of real users. Well, obviously, two things happened, all coming about at the same time in that time frame, the mid to late 80s. And that is, of course, the development of the global positioning system and easy developments in GIS, geographic information systems. And those two things happening almost coincidentally at this, now created this environment where you have tens of thousands of people, many of them who like to add the word professional to whatever it is that they're doing, are out capturing all this great data, and we now live in a world where if you have a tenth of a foot, the sky is falling.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah, and and it's getting better or worse depending upon your perspective here. So yeah, things have changed mightily in just a few years. And when I looked at this, I said, yeah, the surveyors to a great extent, they're going to be the ones who they are the ones who put the datum on the ground for practical applications. There's lots of stuff out there other folks do, engineers and others, but the surveyors are the ones who put this stuff on the ground. So my perspective when I've gone out is saying, okay, here are these changes, and here's something of the science behind it, but here's why it's important for you to understand this, to go back to your clients who are, to one extent or another, happy as a clam with the way things are right now. I can't tell you the number of presentations I've given sitting around the quote malt shop with folks at a state conference, and the conversation would be something along the lines of, just leave it alone. Everything is fine. Because to a great extent, at least on the horizontal side, what we now refer to as the geometric side, it is. Surveyors in this country and others have almost no problem with NAD83. They have high accuracy related to it because they have the cores. Many of them are working with real-time networks, and it does everything they want it to do at the local level. They don't make observations from Wichita, Kansas to Bogota. That's not what they do.
Right.
They work in generally small environments. Now, there are, of course, some exceptions, obviously, places like California, Western Washington and Oregon, parts of Alaska, certainly, that deal with the tectonic side of some of the issues. But the issue, the big issue, the really big issue with NAD83, in that it is not as geocentric as it could be. I know I get my hackles up when I hear folks say, oh, NAD83 is not geocentric. It was absolutely, first of all, it was the first one anywhere in the world, US and Canada, to design with an origin of coordinates to be geocentric. And it was absolutely the best it could be given the technologies
at the time
of the late 70s and 80s. Yeah, so it's, to me, it's like throwing darts. And you've got the bullseye, and NAD83 is on the edge of that little black dot in the center, whereas ITRF is at the center of that black dot in the center. So we can argue about those differences, intellectually, but essentially, what we're dealing with here is better reasons for moving to a more geocentric environment. And again, because the user community is very happy with where we are, then they need to have something in their pocket that when they go back to their company, their agency, their clients, whatever manifestation that happens to be, to say, okay, this is what's going to happen, and this is why we need to do it. Because I don't care how you go about this process. I don't care how good the tools are that NGS is going to develop, and most of them will be exceptionally good. I worry about the vertical transformation, but that's a different issue. They're going to be exceptionally good and easy to use
But I don't care how you do it, it's going to create confusion. It's going to require personnel power, and it's going to cost money, for communities to make these changes. Because unlike the early 80s, when we middle 80s, let's call it, because NAD83 was official in 1986. Unlike that time, now almost every little podunk community in the country has a GIS somewhere. Every town has a GIS almost. Certainly all the major cities have a GIS. The states have GIS, all the federal agencies for huge ranges of issues. And that's going to have an impact. They're sitting on mountains, and I call it mountains. It's like Everest degree of mountains of high accuracy data, because of what we've been able to create with GPS and the surveying and other professionals out creating high accuracy geospatial data. And this time around, it's going to be different, because I can remember certainly, back in those days when we were generating NAD83, and I'd be out. One of my functions was to go out and assist communities with this transition, and I would often talk to a county, talk to a state agency, a state DOT, and somewhere in the conversation, somebody would say, "Do we have to change?" Well, no, you don't have to change. Of course, there's no coordinate Gestapo that's going to come in and force you to put you up against the wall and make you change your coordinates or heights. It doesn't work that way. So there were communities, and even some today, that still rely on the older datums, particularly, regrettably, NGVD 29. I think this time around, it's going to be different, because of the huge number of those communities that rely on real-time networks, which obviously did not exist when we put NAD83 together. And now people, in a whole range of different ways, and we're obviously talking here to and about surveyors, but we recognize that there's multitudes of other folks who have GPS, GNSS embedded in a whole range of technologies that you're using to capture elements of our infrastructure. The person who reads your water meter or gas meter or whatever, they may not know it, but it's taking them right to it. You don't have to walk out and meet the water meter guy and go, "Oh, it's over here." No, they can go right to it, because somewhere in their platforms that they have, they're being guided with GPS technologies. So the impact is going to be extreme. And unlike the days where you could just say, "Well, I'm gonna just rely on those passive marks that I have," sure, you could do that back in the day. Now, the managers of those real-time networks, they're going to rely to a great extent on what NGS provides. And while NGS, at least to my knowledge, has not yet made an official statement about how long they will maintain NAD83 2011 in the cores, I suspect that it will be not unlike what the agency has done every time we've had a reference frame change up till now, which is, okay, we will maintain the cores at NAD83 2011 for 1 year. And after that, we don't maintain it. It's not that it goes away. The coordinates are still available, but they're not maintaining anything, and they're not going to add anything new. And so I would therefore expect that the real-time network managers are probably going to follow that same pattern. They don't have a lot of resources to do things, just like NGS doesn't. So I suspect they might be telling their clients, well, okay, if you want to stay in NAD83 2011, you can do that, but we're only going to, quote, guarantee it or maintain it, or whatever they will use for a year, and after that, you better be ready.
Yes.
So I think this is going to be a big difference, and I think of the surveyors primarily. They are the professionals who have embraced this technology more, certainly earlier and more than anybody else. And because NGS has a limited staff, they don't have hundreds of people. When I was hired in 72, we had almost 1,000 people at NGS. I think they've got 160 or 170 now. And they've got really talented people. The regional advisors are really talented, but they're limited. One advisor has 4, 5, 6 states, and they can't be reaching out to every little community. So to me, the surveyors, they're the ones who have to be the leaders in this. And I'm hoping that that's what NSPS is going to help us do.
Well, exactly. Well, this gives me a good opportunity to break in because for the listeners that are 12, 13, 14 minutes into this conversation, I better tell you who I'm talking to. We're talking to Mr. David Doyle, good friend of the program, good friend of NSPS and surveyors everywhere.
Thank you.
You just hit on it that you started at NGS back in the early 70s.
Yeah.
So while you weren't necessarily around at what I'll call the genesis of all passive monuments, which you do appreciate, that's one thing we wanted to capture here today was to talk about this upcoming change. We just passed. We just flipped the calendar over to July, and July of 2024. So we are really at this point, we're on a probably less than a year countdown to a true steps into data and data modernization. And so, who better to talk to than a geodetic surveyor that has been there for quite a while, involved and has seen everything evolve. And for the listeners, just so you know, this conversation, this whole topic is, I prod Dave on a lot of these things just to talk about because this has been his pride and joy for many, many years in his career. But the fact is that the change is necessary. And that's one thing I've always appreciated about you and your position within NGS and even in your retirement is that change is not just inevitable, change is necessary.
Oh, absolutely.
And so that's part of the reason I wanted to start talk today. This is the beginning of a series about the road to the future of dynamic datums, and really to kind of lay out where we were and some of the lead up to NAD83. And you talked about the passive marks, and while, like you said, that's all been great and fine for the capability that we had, I can't even fathom. I mean, about the time NAD83 was getting rolled around, that was really when I was starting my career. Not that I knew what GPS really was then. That was a government high-tech tool. But the whole concept behind geodesy and using terrestrial methods, just we see the pictures of the Bilby Towers and all these things, and all the triangulation, trilateration. I guess speak a little bit to that from the mid 70s up till really the whole origin and the collaboration necessary to put together NAD83.
Oh,
and
sure.
Really what that took.
Yeah. I think one of the wonderful things that I have found, I've learned in my career, I mean, I started surveying when I got drafted into the Army in 1967. So I've been at this a while. One of the things I learned early on when I went to NGS is that regardless if you come to the term, the community of surveying, whether you come through it through geodesy or you come through it through land surveying, one of the things that we had in common was monumentation, the monument controls. Right? And to a great extent, those of us in this community love monuments. If you've been surveying more than a couple of weeks, you can smell them. And we as professionals love that side. It's great. We can stand on a monument, and sometimes you can, particularly if it's an old one, maybe it goes back 100 years or more, and you can stand there for a moment and think about the people who put that monument in the ground? What were they doing? And I don't care if it's a boundary monument from some guy who laid out a parcel, in 1900, or it's a geodetic monument from 1900. I think about what those guys were doing. So we have that commonality in that. What was different before was that the practicing professional land surveyor did not have the general technologies to perform geodetic quality measurements. When I got out of the service, and I spent a couple of years working for a small land surveying firm in Fairfax, Virginia, it was transit and tape. That was the world. Even though in the Army, which I had just left, we were constantly using big EDM, electronic distance measuring instruments, and those were almost non-existent in the land surveying community. Well, in 1969, Hewlett-Packard comes out with the 3800. That changes that dynamic, and then everything just rolls from there. And today, I point out, everybody's got an EDM in their total station. They don't call it that,
right?
And nobody thinks about it. It was a big deal back in the day. When I came to NGS, we were doing 3-day workshops on how to run an EDM. You can't even imagine doing that today. So it's a piece of technology that has evolved so quickly that it's nobody considers. Now you have the police out there using it, and so many others. Well, GNSS technology is certainly going that same way. The lead up to NAD83, that was one of the big elements. When I came to NGS, what I very quickly learned was that the discussion was around how changes in technologies have impacted what we just call the geodetic networks. We didn't call it the NSRS back then. And it was easy to see one of the big things that NGS was working on, at least on the horizontal side, was we were constantly performing readjustments of areas, because we'd have some triangulation from the 1930s, and now we go back in the 70s, and we're using long-range EDM that can give us millimeter accuracies over 30, 40, 50 miles, which we couldn't do in the past, and we knew the network had distortions. So those distortions were creeping in. Now surveyors could start to see them because they were using, to a great extent, some of the similar technologies that NGS used. So the community of users was starting to see, hey, these things don't quite fit. And then on the side, we also knew space-based positioning was coming along. The transit Doppler, which preceded GPS, and certainly VLBI, very long baseline interferometry, where now we could measure transcontinental, transoceanic measurements to a few millimeters and start to actually measure how the tectonic plates are moving. So all of those things coming together at that time said, look, we really need to step up and do this. The big thing about NAD83, which regrettably, most users today, when they get on, they download a data sheet for some triangulation station or some mark that they want to go out and use. Without knowing the history behind it, the first thing we had to do at NGS was we had to hire a bunch of people. And the agency was, the folks who were going to do this adjustment, we knew we needed a lot of people, and it needed to be automated. Couldn't do this by hand anymore. So we spent the better part of, I think it was at least 10 years, maybe it was 12 years, just hiring people. I used to refer to it as shanghaiing them out of universities, mainly with like a math degree or something. We'll teach them the geodesy later, and getting them to automate every observation that had been performed since 1816. And putting that into a single simultaneous least squares adjustment. So when somebody downloads a data sheet for a station that might go back to, certainly it's easy enough to find them and go back to the 1880s or 1900, whatever. What they don't see is that in the database, in that relational database that NGS has, is every measurement that was ever used: triangulation, directions, distances, astronomic azimuths, you name it. So it was an incredible effort just to do that. And then I think the thing that hit us was I'm being trivial about this, but we push the button in the summer of 86. The data comes out. All right, boy, we're happy. We're pushing this stuff out. And I laugh about this. I joke about it somewhat, but it's not really a joke. I can remember sitting back at my little government chair with my cup of coffee going, oh, well, okay, now what are we going to do?
Now what?
We've just readjusted the entire North American continent with the Canadians, gone through this big, huge effort, blah, 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 all this stuff. What could possibly be left to do? And literally overnight, GPS showed us, oh, we have distortions in the network, because now we're not limited by terrestrial line of sight. We can make measurements that are 200 miles long to literally centimeter or even better levels of accuracy, or thousands of kilometers long now. And so the transition has been there. It was a big deal. Just a couple of years after NAD83 was published, NGS is we're sitting around the table going, well, what do we do? How do we deal with this? And out of that came various programs that the agency involved with. The early on was the high accuracy reference networks, the HARNs, HPGN before that, high precision GPS network. And we're doing that. We're running around the country. We got field crews running around the country because we were amongst the first who had GPS, of course, and trying to work with states as they were acquiring, states, typically a DOT, as they were acquiring GPS technologies. And then by the middle of the 90s, early 90s rather, we start to realize, hey, we can start to get good heights from this technology, which when it first came out, many of us would be out there going, no, bad dog, you're never going to get good heights from GPS. Well, that changes, all right? People like, obviously, Dave Zolkowski and Bill Henning and Steve Frakes and others who worked on these things came up with wonderful utilities that will allow us to now go out and capture these high accuracy heights, orthometric heights from using GPS, what NGS refers to as height modernization. And we realized right away, well, from that, we've got to have really high accuracy ellipsoid heights, and we don't have that. We hadn't planned on it. So we had to go back and resurvey the country another time. And we referred to that as the federal and cooperative base network. And we went back and we done all 50 states again. That'll never happen again, but it just shows how much this technology has impacted the way we use the reference frame. And the passive marks, well, there was a time, I know, when quite a number of folks at NGS on the science side could not imagine why you would want to use a passive mark. What's the point of that, right?
Right.
And there were significant technical, shall we call them family discussions about this process. And I'm hopeful, and I'm very hopeful, because of various conversations that I've had personally, along with things that you and I have both heard in NSPS, NGS teleconferences, that NGS is looking at now making sure that the passive marks are brought along. The big difference, and it's really already this way, they just don't talk about it that much. The big difference is the passive marks will not define the datum. They are a reference to it. They're a way to access it, but they don't define it. The cores will do that. And to a great extent, it's actually been that way for probably 20 years. We didn't really talk about it much, but once the cores started evolving and we knew we had a network across the country, well, to a great extent, NAD83 was defined by it, and the passive marks, NGS didn't make a big deal out of it, but the passive marks didn't define NAD83 2007. It was the cores, and you fit the passive marks to that. And the same was true with now NAD83 2011. And so I'm really, really hopeful that leadership at NGS, sees these issues, because passive marks have such great importance in so many aspects. Obviously, in land surveying, passive marks to one extent or another right now are everything. I have my own opinions about the future, but that's for the future. But one aspect of that, I look at, and it's on the vertical side, mind you, but you look at title datums. Right? Title datums are literally defined by the passive marks. You've got to have the passive marks leveled to a tide gauge. The average surveyor doesn't get to go out to the tide gauge and perform leveling from that. There's a suite of benchmarks that co-ops, the Center for Operational Oceanographic Products and Services. That's how you define the title datums. And now, of course, they're being incorporated with GNSS technology, and they will be an integrated part of the NSRS. So yeah, these are new dynamics, and I talk to surveyors, and we all do, and we hear it from some folks going, well, it's coming out in 2025, 2026. I'm going to retire before that. Yeah, I hear that quite a bit. But it shouldn't be as scary as what a lot of people want to think, because the big science stuff, plate tectonics, NGS is taking care of that in the background. The average surveyor, average professional doesn't have to worry about that. To a great extent, the new reference frames will look just like they do now, just different coordinates. The one big issue that surveyors will have to deal with, and it's already being done in California, and you can't convince me that the surveyors in California are way smarter than the surveyors in Arkansas, is to put an epoch on a coordinate and a height. That will be the big difference. That'll take a little bit of education, and of course that'll have to be extended into the geographic information system. To me, that's where the big issue is, getting surveyors to be that leadership with their local or state GIS developers.
Well, exactly. And I think we're getting past, I think with the aging of the profession and really some evolution, especially with the technology, I think we're getting past those days of a survey firm kind of locking themselves in, and I use this term lovingly, the ma and pa surveying firms, that we're getting past the days of where they don't work outside of their county or a county or two. And so they're really kind of locked into their own little worlds, and their little projects with all their coordinate systems being 5,000, 10,000 origins in all these different places. I think those days are gone. I mean, they're almost gone. They're much closer than they were. Yeah. And I think especially with the scale of economy now, I remember when GPS first came out, even just, the static stuff, and then even into RTK. That was a huge investment. And not that it's still not now, but, to have some of these, I'm hearing more and more firms that are buying the smaller brand GNSS receivers that are $2,000-$3,000 versus $25,000 or $30,000 that they used to be. So the use of technology, just like you refer to with the EDMs and other things, it's become that much more available. Well, you can't have the latest technology without truly working in the latest datums. You can, but it's I'm trying to think of things that would be similar. It doesn't make any sense to try to do that and try to merge old systems with brand new technology. Yeah. So it makes sense that we are going forward now. And I chuckled when you said that the last few versions of NAD83, 07 and 11 were still really Coors based rather than anything passive. But like you said, I think it's still a kind of a safety blanket that we can go out there, we can hit a few passive marks to know that we're and I think good surveyors do that.
Yes.
To think that we just jump out of the truck, dial up our real-time network through a cell phone and say, oh, says I'm live, says my PDOP's good. Let's just go with it. I think a good surveyor does check into something just to make sure that everything's still, nothing's wrong with the system. Nothing blip on the screen anywhere. My point to all this is that I appreciate the whole thought behind it and what NGS did back in the early 2000s to have enough foresight, pun intended, to look ahead and go, yeah, this whole GPS GNSS thing is changing the dynamic of what we're dealing with here. And to recognize now that I might be okay working in my own little county, and from one side to the other is not really going to change, but the whole concept that this whole thing's moving, uh, which is it's a real thing. And so to be able to tie into something bigger, it's not trying to force people into change. It's just, this is going to be a better way to do it.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And I can't tell you how many conversations I've had with surveyors who are talking about this and saying, well, look, you buy this box that will give you a centimeter. And you don't buy the box that'll give you 10 centimeters because you're in this centimeter world now. Okay. But where to a great extent, again, California being an exception, Western Washington and Oregon, you're standing on a plate. I don't care if you're in the middle of Iowa, you're standing on a tectonic plate that's moving half again as much of that a year, a centimeter and a half to a great extent. Almost the whole country's moving about a centimeter and a half a year. How do you not eventually take that into account? You certainly have to. And I think surveyors can certainly understand that. It's a matter of education, just like surveyors to be licensed everywhere in the country, every state, you have to know something about the law in your state, how that works. Okay, now you have to have these boxes. You should know something about the geodesy. You don't have to go off to Ohio State or Maine or someplace and take an advanced degree. You don't have to do that, but you should know the principles of it. And like you said about using the course and having a reference. When I think of that, I think of what most surveyors would do in a vision I can have of it. If you had a surveyor who was going out to do a boundary and they found one mark and they found it easily, would they just go, oh, okay, I found one boundary corner, I'm done. I don't have to go look for any evidence that says, oh, this corner is the correct corner. It's the called for corner. It looks like it is. It feels like it is, blah, blah, blah. No, you're going to go look for other evidence to the extent possible and practical.
Absolutely.
Any good survey. I have a great personal story about being verbally abused by my first party chief on exactly that topic. You don't know that corner is the corner until you have validated. Well, I think to a great extent, that's what the passive reference frame provides the surveyor, that comfort level. Okay, yes, I'm getting this real-time stuff. Maybe it's from a vendor. It's not even from the federal government. It's not from NGS because NGS doesn't provide that. I'm paying this company to give me this, or maybe you get it from the state. I want something that tells me that network is good, that I can rely on it. Oh, here's this passive mark. I go hit that, and I hopefully meet whatever those criterias are, a couple of hundredths of a foot, tenth of a foot, whatever you need, and go, oh, okay, I've got that warm fuzzy. Now I go off and do what I want. So that the passive marks provide a wonderful framework for multitudes of things. One just being that warm fuzzy, that what you're getting for anything else is in fact correct, much less the issue that, oh, those passive marks might relate to, you're looking at monitoring movement in something, or it's a boundary mark,
right.
Or it's part of the public land survey system, or the list goes on and on and on. I can't do justice to it like most surveyors can.
Well, and the example I try to give to the public, did this when it was in private practice and even now. Just say, for instance, you've got somebody that has a home and a lot in a block. They've got lot 12 in the middle of this block, and they have 40-foot wide, 100-foot deep, and they've got 4 markers around their plot. We can't just simply find those 4 and call it good.
Yeah.
It's okay within itself. How does it fit within the grand scheme of things? How does it fit to the block corners?
Yeah.
It could be that whole figure, it could measure perfect, and it could be rotation and just completely off. And so when people will call, and unfortunately, NSPS, we get a lot of calls from homeowners around the country. Well, I asked the surveyor, I only needed my east line measured. I didn't need the whole survey.
Yeah.
And so, my point being here is that it's not that easy. And so beyond just measuring the one line, to your point of measuring the one point, where does it fall in the whole reference frame? Is it where it, and you're right, we are, hopefully most surveyors are, we really like our monuments. We hold them near and dear to our heart, but if they're not in the right place, if they weren't, excuse me, if they weren't located correctly. And so there's some things that there are checks and balances that need to be done.
Yeah.
And that's the part that, I'm hoping that we're able to get across to those that are still skeptical of dynamic datums, is the fact that, you may be measuring things now, but, in the grand scheme of things, especially over a long period of time, things do move.
Oh, yeah.
And the relationship in there, to your point, California, I remember hearing a speaker several years ago. He lives outside of San Diego. And he totally geeks out on this stuff, that he, every so often he's got a point in his front yard that he goes out and he measures with his receiver. And the fact that it has moved, I want to say like 6 feet in 10 years.
Yeah, sure.
That whole place has moved, even though the neighborhood looks still intact, everything looks good. These plates move. And so, to those that will argue and say, well, fine, if the neighborhood hasn't changed, whatever, you don't know that. You don't know where those subtle differences are.
Yeah.
So this is why it's part and parcel that this is very important, that we have a knowledge base of what we're dealing with.
Yeah. Oh, I couldn't agree more. I have a story I tell. It happened a few years ago. I was contacted by a surveyor in California, in San Francisco, and his company had surveying for a development of a park. I think it's called Washington Park, and the city was gonna do some upgrades to the park. So he goes out and he finds a survey mark, and it's a big piece of granite, a big stone, and engraved on the side it says CGS, I think 1864, 65, something like that. And he looks in the NGS database and there's nothing there, because he knows CGS is the coast survey. There's nothing there. So he makes a call to NGS and it's nothing in the database. And somebody says, well, talk to Dave. He calls me, and right away when he described what this thing was, sent me a picture. I knew what it was. It was an old astronomical station, which had regrettably never been connected to the bigger geodetic networks, but still out there. Was set by George Davidson, one of the great scientists of the West Coast. And there's a publication, so I was from the old Coast and Geodetic Survey. I could go out and scan the stuff, send it to him. He's happy as a clam. And then he asked me, he says, do you have a good position on it? And I said, well, I have an astronomical position from whatever it was, 1864, 65. I said, give me a couple of days. And so I do a few computations, none of them particularly difficult, nothing where you have to have an advanced degree to do any of this stuff. It's all stuff that's pretty simple. And ultimately I came up, I said, well, I wrote him an email back and I said, here's my best estimate of what the state plane coordinates should be for that thing. And I said, I hope that's helpful. Well, about a month or so goes by, and he sends me an email. He said that, they finally went out and they performed some GPS measurements. And they matched what I had by like a foot and a half in northing and easting. I don't remember the exact numbers. And I thought, now that's pretty amazing, going from 1860s, from astronomic observations to contemporary positioning, but I could do it because we had the metadata and we knew
Right.
how things were moving. And I said, to me, the issue is here, it's a big part of legacy. And in surveying, as any professional surveyor will tell you, yes, the future is important. Of course it's important, but legacy is just as important. What happened, whether it's parcel mapping, I don't care what it is. Legacy is a huge part of that. And so when we look at the capacity for space-based positioning, where it is now, again, I tell people in my sessions, I said, if we come back and visit this 10 years from now, if I'm still around and we visit it 10 years from now, the toys we're using today will be out, in the convention center right next to the transits that, the grandfathers used.
Yeah.
Because this is where we're headed. And in fact, to me, it's a big part. It's a really big part of the rationale for the new datums. The Air Force, who of course are responsible for now for putting up the GPS satellites, GPS-3, the current block that's being updated, and we're going to get the L5 frequency. They had a website, and this was several years ago, and regrettably they've taken it down. I can't find it. I wish I'd captured it at the time. But they had a website that was describing Block 3. And one of the elements in there, they talked about how, the satellites are going to last longer and they'll perform better in these conditions, blah, 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 safety of life, yada, yada, all the good things that they had. But then they put in there positional accuracy. And they were describing positional accuracy at the 95% confidence level of, if my memory serves me correct, it was about 65 centimeters, roughly 2 feet. I remember stepping back from that going, wow, right now, 95% confidence, you take up, I don't care what box you've got, a little handheld receiver, cell phone, or big end receiver. You go out and, yeah, exactly. You take your big end receiver, go out, punch here. That's all you do. You don't tie it into anything. You probably got, if you're lucky, you probably got about 1.5 to 2.5 meters. Well, now anybody, 300 plus million people in this country are going to have access to roughly 2-foot positioning. And I've always found that the Air Force was always pessimistic for good reasons. When they would say, it's going to be 65 centimeters, 68, whatever it was. It was roughly about that. My perspective is, you want to know what it's really going to look like on a day-to-day basis? Take that number, whack it in half. And now you're going to start to see all the homeowners with whatever tools they've got, and they'll all have them walking around. Today, we can go out and easily argue with the guy, yeah, your position's off by 5-6 feet, so you can't compare it with what I'm doing. Now, if they're within 1 foot to 2 feet, to me, this is kind of a game changer. And especially if we're dealing with NAD83, which has a bias to ITRF, which is essentially what comes out of the GNSS satellites, that 6 feet, 7 feet that we have, that's just going to pop right up. Everybody's going to see it. And so it's really, really important that NGS takes care of that, and that the surveying community and others start to understand, these little arguments that we can get away with now very easily, not so much maybe once GPS-3 goes live, which it's not quite as, the Air Force hasn't gotten it up quite as quick as they want. In fact, it should be operational already, but I suspect late 26, maybe early 27, we'll see that. So it's in our neighborhood. It's around the corner.
Yeah.
And I think we have to be prepared.
Oh, exactly. And for those who don't think that time flies, I can't believe it's 2024 already. So yeah, it's 26, 27. That's not that far away. It truly isn't.
Yeah.
So yeah. Well, listen, Mr. Retired Geodetic Surveyor, I appreciate your time. We want to continue this conversation. In fact, I'm going to put you on the hook to come back
anytime,
because I do want to, and you, along with Linda Foster, our current
Oh yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
president-elect, I would like to dig a little deeper into low distortion projection
Sure.
and what's going to come about with a lot of the new datums
Yeah.
that are being established, along with the whole updated NSRS.
Yeah.
And really, I'd like to speak a little more to the advantages we're going to have going forward
Yes.
with all these low distortion projection models that are going to be out there. That's going to make things that much better
Yeah.
for the end user. Period.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's a little tease for our listeners out there to see what we can do. But I guess, and also for listeners, as a side note, just so everybody knows, passive marks between Dave and his wife Renee, they are constantly on the search for passive marks, and they are they're documenting those as quick as they can. It's amazing what you two have went out and chased and have found some pretty interesting ones from time to time.
Oh, we have such fun with it. Next week we're headed out to Ohio, do a little family visits and something. So we're taking some time. We're going to go up to Toledo to go to a Mud Hens game. It's been a bucket list for us for a while. So we're going to go to a Mud Hens game, and I've already got PIDs of marks in and around Toledo that when we get in there before we go to the game, we'll go look for a couple of marks, and it's just great fun for us, So
very good. I appreciate you taking time to talk to me today. Like I said,
pleasure, Tim.
it's really important. Like I said, we're on a countdown now, and it's about making our practitioners more aware of what this is all about and why it's important that we do this. And I guess really to hear it from industry experts that have been through all of this and watch the progression to really speak to how important this really is. So thank you for not just your time today, but all of the work you've done throughout your career and making us better surveyors.
Well, I've had a good life, and the surveying community has been exceptionally good to me. And so I just hope I can do my little piece, before I go on to the great hereafter, whatever that is. So happy to do what I can any given point in time. If there's something I can offer, then I'm here. And I love to tell the story. So there you go.
Well, you got it.
And it's a great story. The story of the Coast Survey is a great story.
Well, we're gonna hold you for that. I definitely will. We'll make that its own little recording. That would be great. That would be great.
Would love it.
All right. Well, that'll do it for today. Wherever you listen to the podcast, please hit that like button and subscribe, and we will talk to you soon. Thanks. You've been listening to the Surveyor Says podcast, brought to you by the National Society of Professional Surveyors. If you have any questions about today's episode or any other topic, please email us at info@nsps.us.com, and we are here to help. Visit our website, nsps.us.com, to learn more about our association, the programs we administer and support, our sustaining members, and information about future episodes of Surveyor Says. Subscribe to the podcast on iTunes, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, iHeartRadio, Spotify, as well as our podcast host, Podbean. And remember, it's a great day to be a surveyor.